Hello everyone. In this lecture, we'd like to explore the exercise energy expenditure during sports. Approximately, the accepted energy expenditure for moderate physical activity is between 3.5 calories per minute and 7 calories per minute. And for vigorous physical activity is over 7 calories per minute. So for accurate calculation of the energy expended, it's very important to calculate based on the body weight of an individual. Exercise generally increases the body's energy expenditure, and this presents a challenge. The glucose to oxygen ratio for full oxidation is 6:1, but the blood ratio is 2:1, and this makes oxygen a limiting factor. Oxygen diffusion. Oxygen enters the lungs through the process of diffusion. In the alveoli, the equilibrium is reached when carbon dioxide and oxygen partial pressures match those in the pulmonary. Oxygen transportation to tissues. Within the tissues, oxygen is consumed and carbon dioxide is produced. The ratio of carbon dioxide production to oxygen consumption is referred to as the respiratory quotient, which varies between 0.7 to 1.0. If only glucose were used to fuel the body, the respiratory quotient would equal 1. And this results in decreased carbon dioxide, decreased oxygen, and increased carbon dioxide partial pressures with an equilibrium of 46%. The role of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin in the red blood cells increases oxygen carrying capacity. And there are a lot of factors that may affect oxygen binding to hemoglobin. And this may include local oxygen concentration, the carbon dioxide concentration, the temperature, and the pH. Oxygen dissociation curve. This is the expression of the relationship between the partial pressure of oxygen and the oxygen saturation of hemoglobin. And it shows the relationship between oxygen saturation and partial pressure. Hemoglobin loses about 25% of its oxygen in the tissues, and this is reflected in the arterial-venous differences. The Bohr effect describes how increased carbon dioxide and hydrogen levels reduce oxygen binding affinity to hemoglobin. And it also describes hemoglobin's low affinity for oxygen, which is secondary to increases in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide and decreased blood pH. The lower affinity in turn enhances the unloading of oxygen into tissues so that the oxygen demands of the tissues are met. During exercise, you find that there is decreased affinity, which leads to oxygen release and tissue consumption. Erythropoietin. This is a hormone that is found in the kidneys. So the kidneys are responsible for the production of EPO in response to low oxygen levels. And this hormone stimulates the production of erythrocytes, which are the red blood cells with more hemoglobin to transport more oxygen. This hormone is used as doping by endurance athletes in order to enhance the oxygen and performance. The breathing mechanism. This involves two events: inspiration, when the air moves into the lungs, and expiration, when the air leaves the lungs. And breathing is one of the four components of respiration, which other three are gas diffusion, gas transport, and regulation. Breathing involves the contraction of breathing muscles that creates under pressure, pulling air into the lungs. And the main inhalation muscles include the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. Tidal volume. The tidal volume is the amount of air that moves in or out of the lungs with each respiratory cycle. You can also say it is the amount of air inhaled during a normal breath, and it measures around 500 ml in an average healthy adult male and approximately 400 milliliters in a healthy female. During exercise, the tidal volume increases and reserve volumes are utilized. The ventilation rate. This is expressed as the volume of gas entering or leaving the lungs in a given amount of time. It can be calculated by multiplying the volume of gas, either inhaled or exhaled, during a breath, that is the tidal volume, by the breathing rate. The ventilation rate increases with exercise intensity when the tidal volume reaches its limit. And tidal ventilation is a product of the ventilation rate and the tidal volume. The vital lung capacity. This is the maximum volume expired after a maximum inspiration. The vital lung capacity does not significantly correlate with performance, except for swimmers and divers who strengthen breathing muscles against water pressure. The oxygen debt and EPOC. At exercise onset, there is an oxygen deficit, which utilizes energy stores like PCR, that is phosphocreatine, and anaerobic metabolism. After exercise, you find that EPOC, which is the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, occurs to restore the PCR and clear the lactate. Factors in post-exercise recovery. High fitness individuals require a faster recovery rate post-exercise, and this indicates better mitochondrial capacity for EPOC. The mitochondria play a very important role in restoring the PCR stores. The role of the peripheral receptors. The peripheral receptors in muscle joints sense muscle contraction and lactate production, and they drive increased breathing during intense exercise. Oxygen demands and ventilation. Oxygen demands will determine the ventilation rate. At higher demands, increased ventilation responds more to rising carbon dioxide levels. Lactate and lactic acid production. Lactate and carbon dioxide production are both associated with increased acid production due to anaerobic exercise. Anaerobic glycolysis produces carbon dioxide, which leads to increased pulmonary ventilation. The lactate threshold will represent a point where the additional carbon dioxide production leads to increased ventilation rate. And the lactate itself is not acidic, but the resulting hydrogen ions are the ones that cause acidity. Lactate and exercise performance. Increased lactate production leads to reduced exercise performance. Strength training reduces lactate accumulation, which benefits endurance athletes. Regular muscle fiber types. The type 2 muscle fibers have a higher buffer capacity with histidine-containing peptides, that is carnosine. And carnosine buffers acid production during intense exercise. Carnosine and performance. The sprinters and rowers, that is the type 2 fiber users, have higher carnosine content and buffer systems than the marathon runners, which use the type 1 fibers. Beta-alanine supplementation may increase muscle carnosine and performance, and also pulmonary ventilation and cardiac function. So basically, this is how energy expenditure can be regulated using the different mechanisms in the body. Thank you.